Buddhism vis-a-vis other approaches. Is Buddhism similar to other contemporary teachings in India? The Dharma realized by the Buddha was unheard of before. In his first sermon, the Dharmakaka Sutra, the Buddha said that the Dharma which he preached was unheard of before. Knowledge of the Dharma which arose was clear to his vision, to his knowledge, to his wisdom, to his penetration, and to his enlightenment. Some people claim that the Buddha did not preach a new doctrine but merely reformed the old teaching which was existing in India. However, the Buddha was no mere reformer of Hinduism as some protagonists of this ancient creed make him out to be. The Buddha's way of life and doctrine were substantially different from the way of life and the religious beliefs that the people in India had. The Buddha lived, taught and died as a non-Vedic and non-Brahmanic religious teacher. Nowhere did the Buddha acknowledge his indebtedness to the existing religious beliefs and practices. The Buddha considered himself as initiating a rational spiritual method, as opening a new path. That was the main reason why many other religious groups could not agree with him. He was condemned, criticized and insulted by the most noted teachers and sects of the Vedic Brahmanic tradition. It was with the intention of destroying or absorbing the Buddha and his teaching that the Brahmins of the pre-Christian era went so far as to accept the Buddha as an avatara or incarnation of their god. Yet some others despised him as a Vaisalaka, a Mundaka, a Samanaka, a Nastika, and Sudra. These words were used in India during the Buddha's time to insult a religious man who was not a Brahmin. There is no doubt that the Buddha reformed certain customs, religious duties, rites, and ethics and ways of living prevalent at the time. The greatness of his character was like a pinpoint that pricked the balloon of false beliefs and practices so that they could burst and reveal their emptiness. But as far as the fundamental, philosophical, and psychological teachings are concerned, it is groundless to say that the Buddha had copied ideas from any existing religion at that time. For instance, the idea of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, dependent origination, and nirvana, were not known before his coming. Although the belief in karma and rebirth was very common, the Buddha gave quite logical and reasonable explanations to this belief and introduced it as natural law of cause and effect. Although the Buddha used these terms because they were familiar to his listeners, he gave them very original interpretations, quite different from the way the Brahmins understood them. Despite all these, the Buddha did not ridicule any sincere existing religious belief or practice. He appreciated the value of truth wherever he found it, and he even gave a better explanation of their beliefs. That is why he once said that the truth must be respected wherever it is found. On the other hand, however, he was never afraid to speak out against mythology and false claims. Is Buddhism a theory or a philosophy? The enlightenment of the Buddha is not a product of mere intellect. During the time of the Buddha there were many learned men in India who pursued knowledge simply for its own sake. These people were interested only in theoretical knowledge. Indeed, some of them went from city to city challenging anyone to a debate, and their greatest thrill was to defeat an opponent in such verbal combats. But the Buddha said that such people were no nearer to the realization of the truth because, in spite of their cleverness, knowledge and verbal skills, they did not have true wisdom and insight to overcome greed, hatred, and delusion. In fact, these people were often proud and arrogant. Their egoistic concepts disturbed the religious atmosphere, and they loved arguing simply for the sake of arguing. According to the Buddha, one must first seek to understand one's own mind. This was to be done through concentration, which gives one a profound inner wisdom or realization. Insight is to be gained not by philosophical argument or worldly knowledge but by the silent realization of the illusion of the self. Buddhism is a righteous way of life for the peace and happiness of every living being. It is a method to get rid of miseries and to find liberation. The teaching of the Buddha is not limited to one nation or race. It is neither a creed nor mere faith. It is a teaching for the entire universe. It is a teaching for all time. Its objectives are selfless service, goodwill, peace, salvation and deliverance from suffering. Salvation in Buddhism is an individual affair. You have to save yourself just as you have to eat, drink and sleep by yourself. The advice rendered by the Buddha points the way to liberation, but his advice was never intended to be taken as a theory or philosophy. When he was questioned as to what theory he propounded, the Buddha replied that he preached no theories and whatever he did preach was the result of his own experience. Thus his teaching does not offer any theory. Theory cannot bring one nearer to spiritual perfection. Theories are the very fetters that bind the mind and impede spiritual progress. Indian and Chinese philosophies originated in religious beliefs, while some other religions are not based on philosophy but dogma. The Buddha, however, taught us to see things as they are, observing phenomena and not relying on anything which cannot be experienced by each individual. Theories are products of the intellect, and the Buddha understood the limitations of the human intellect. He taught that enlightenment is not a product of mere intellect. One cannot achieve emancipation by taking an intellectual course. This statement may seem irrational, but it is true. Intellectuals tend to spend too much of their valuable time on study, critical analysis, and debate. This is unbalanced because they usually have little or no time for practice. A great thinker, philosopher, scientist, metaphysician, etc., can also turn out to be an intelligent fool. He may be an intellectual giant endowed with the power to conceive ideas quickly and to express thoughts clearly. But if he pays no attention to his actions and their consequences, and if he is only bent on fulfilling his own longings and inclinations at any cost, then, according to the Buddha, H. E. is an intellectual fool, a man of inferior wisdom though rich in factual knowledge. Such a person will indeed hinder his own spiritual progress. The Buddha's teaching contains practical wisdom that cannot be limited to theory or to philosophy, because philosophy deals mainly with knowledge but is not concerned with translating knowledge into day-to-day practices. Buddhism lays special emphasis on practice and realization. The philosopher sees the miseries and disappointments of life but, unlike the Buddha, offers no practical solution to overcome our frustrations, which are part of the unsatisfactory nature of life. The philosopher merely pushes his thoughts to dead ends. Philosophy is useful because it has enriched our intellectual imagination and diminished dogmatic assurance, which closes the mind to further progress. To that extent, Buddhism values philosophy, but philosophy fails to quench one's spiritual thirst. Philosophy is to know, but Buddhism is to practice. Remember that the chief aim of a Buddhist is to attain purity and enlightenment. Enlightenment vanquishes ignorance, which is the root of birth and death. However, this vanquishing of ignorance cannot be achieved except by the exercise of one's confidence. All other attempts, especially mere intellectual attempts, are not very effective. This is why the Buddha concluded, "These metaphysical questions are not calculated to profit, they are not concerned with the Dharma. They do not lead to right conduct, or to detachment, or to purification from lusts, or to quietude, or to a calm heart, or to real knowledge, or to higher insight, or to nirvana. Malum kya Buddha Sutta, Mahihima Nikaya. In place of metaphysical speculation, the Buddha was more concerned with teaching a practical understanding of the Four Noble Truths that he discovered: what suffering is, what the origin of suffering is, what the cessation of suffering is, how to overcome suffering and realize final salvation. These truths are all practical matters to be fully understood and realized by anyone who really experiences emancipation. Enlightenment is the dispelling of ignorance. It is the ideal of the Buddhist life. We can now clearly see that enlightenment is not an act of the intellect. Mere speculation does not help a person to come into contact with life so intimately. This is why the Buddha placed great emphasis on personal experience. Meditation is a practical scientific system to verify the truth that comes through personal experience and insight. Through meditation, the will tries to transcend the condition it has put on itself, and this is the awakening of consciousness. Metaphysics merely ties us down in a tangled and matted mass of thoughts and words. Is Buddhism pessimistic? Buddhism is neither pessimistic nor optimistic but a realistic religion. Some critics argue that Buddhism is morbid, cynical, hovering on the dark and shadowy side of life, an enemy of harmless pleasures, and an unfeeling trampler on the innocent joys of life. They claim that Buddhism is pessimistic, fostering an attitude of hopelessness towards life, encouraging a vague, general feeling that pain and evil predominate in human affairs. Even the current Pope in Rome has stated that Buddhism teaches a negative attitude to life. These critics base their views on the first noble truth that all conditioned things are in a state of suffering. They do not see that not only had the Buddha taught the cause of suffering, but he also taught the way to end suffering. In any case, is there any religious teacher who praised this worldly life and advised us to cling to it? Every religion talks about salvation, which means liberation from uncertainty and unsatisfactoriness in this world. If the founder of this religion, the Buddha, was such a pessimist, one would expect his personality to be portrayed on more severe lines than has been done. The Buddha image is the personification of peace, serenity, hope and goodwill. The magnetic and radiant smile of the Buddha is the epitome of his doctrine. To the worried and the frustrated, his smile of enlightenment and hope is an unfailing tonic and soothing balm. The Buddha radiated his love and compassion in all directions. Such a person can hardly be a pessimist. And when the sword-happy kings and princes listened to him, they realized that the only true conquest is the conquest of the self, and the best way to win the hearts of the people was to teach them to appreciate the Dharma truth. The Buddha cultivated his sense of humor to such a high degree that his bitter opponents were disarmed with the greatest ease. Often they could not help laughing at themselves. The Buddha had a wonderful tonic. He cleansed their systems of dangerous toxins and they became enthusiastic thereafter to follow in his footsteps. In his sermons, dialogues, and discussions, he maintained that poise and dignity which won for him the respect and affection of the people. How can such a person be a pessimist? The Buddha never expected his followers to be constantly brooding over the suffering of life and leading a miserable and unhappy existence. He taught the fact of suffering only so that he could show people how to overcome this suffering and move in the direction of happiness. To become an enlightened person, one must have joy, one of the factors that the Buddha recommended to us to cultivate. Joy is hardly pessimistic. There are two Buddhist texts called the Therigatha and Therigatha which are full of the joyful utterances of the Buddha's disciples, both male and female, who found peace and happiness in life through his teaching. The king of Kosala once told the Buddha that unlike many a disciple of other religious systems who looked haggard, coarse, pale, emaciated and unprepossessing, his disciples were joyful and elated, jubilant and exultant, enjoying the spiritual life, serene, peaceful and living with a gazelle's mind, light-hearted. The king added that he believed that this healthy disposition was due to the fact that these venerable ones had certainly realized the great and full significance of the Blessed One's teachings. Majjhima Nikaya. When asked why his disciples, who lived a simple and quiet life with only one meal a day, were so radiant, the Buddha replied, "They do not repent the past, nor do they brood over the future. They live in the present with contentment. Therefore, they are radiant. By brooding over the future and repenting the past, fools dry up like green reeds cut down in the sun." Samyutta Nikaya. As a religion, Buddhism teaches about the unsatisfactory nature of everything in this world. Yet one cannot simply categorize Buddhism as a pessimistic religion, because it also teaches us how to overcome this unsatisfactoriness. According to the Buddha, even the worst sinner, after paying for what he has done, can attain salvation. Buddhism offers every human being the hope of attaining his or her salvation one day. Other religions, however, take it for granted that some people will be bad forever and have an eternal hell waiting for them. In that respect, such religions are more pessimistic. Buddhists deny such a belief. Buddhism is neither optimistic nor pessimistic. It does not encourage human beings to look at the world through their changing feelings of optimism and pessimism. Rather, Buddhism encourages us to be realistic. We must learn to see things as they truly are. Is Buddhism atheistic? Atheism is associated with a materialistic doctrine that knows nothing beyond this world. The Buddha has condemned godlessness, by which he meant the denial of worship and renunciation, the denial of moral, spiritual, and social obligations, and the denial of a religious life. He recognized most emphatically the existence of moral and spiritual values. He acclaimed the supremacy of the moral law. Only in one sense can Buddhism be described as atheistic, namely, in so far as it denies the existence of an eternal omnipotent God or Godhead who is the creator and ordainer of the world and who can miraculously save others. The word atheism, however, frequently carries a number of disparaging overtones or implications which are in no way applicable to the Buddha's teaching. Those who use the word atheism often associate it with a materialistic doctrine that knows nothing beyond this world of the senses and the slight happiness it can bestow. Buddhism advocates nothing of that sort. There is no justification for branding Buddhists as atheists, nihilists, pagans, heathens, or communists just because they do not depend on a creator God. The Buddhist concept of God is different from that of other religions. Differences in belief do not justify name-calling and slanderous words. Buddhism agrees with other religions that true and lasting happiness cannot be found in this material world. The Buddha adds that true and lasting happiness cannot be found on the higher or supramundane plane of existence to which the name of heavenly or divine world is given. While the spiritual values advocated by Buddhism are orientated to a state transcending the world with the attainment of nirvana, they do not make a separation between the beyond and the here and now. They have firm roots in the world itself, for they aim at the highest realization in this present existence.
Part 3. Leading a Buddhist Life. Moral Foundation for Humanity. What is the purpose of life? The human being is the highest fruit on the tree of evolution. it is for the individual to realize his or her position in existence and understand the true meaning of his life. The purpose of life is to achieve the end of suffering or unsatisfactoriness. To know the purpose of life, you will first have to observe it through your experience and insight. Then, you will discover for yourself its true meaning. Guidelines can be given, but you must create the necessary conditions for the arising of realization yourself. There are several prerequisites to the discovery of the purpose of life. First, you must understand the nature of human life. Next, you keep your mind calm and peaceful by adopting religious practices. When these conditions are met, the answer you seek will come like the gentle rain from the sky. Understanding the nature of human beings. Human beings may be clever enough to land on the moon and discover wondrous things in the universe, but they have yet to delve into the inner workings of their own minds. They have yet to learn how their minds can be developed to the fullest potential so that its true nature can be realized. As yet, human beings are still wrapped in ignorance. They do not know who they really are or what is expected of them. As a result, they misinterpret everything and act according to their imagination. Is it not conceivable that our entire civilization is built on this misinterpretation? The failure to understand existence leads us to assume a false identity of a bloated, self-seeking egoist, and to pretend to be what we are not or are unable to be. People must make an effort to overcome ignorance to arrive at realization and enlightenment. All great people are born as human beings from the womb, but they work their way up to greatness. Realization and enlightenment cannot be poured into the human heart like water into a tank. Even the Buddha had to cultivate his mind to realize the real nature of human life. Human beings can be enlightened, become a Buddha if they wake up from the dream that is created by their own ignorance, and become fully awakened. They must realize that what they are today is the result of an infinite number of repetitions of thoughts and actions. They are not ready-made, they are continually in the process of becoming, always changing. And it is in this characteristic of change that their future lies, because it means that it is possible for them to mold their character and destiny through the control of their actions, speech, and thoughts. Indeed, they become the thoughts and actions that they choose to perform. They are the highest fruit on the tree of evolution. It is for them to realize their position in existence and to understand the true meaning of life. Understanding the nature of life. Most people dislike facing the facts of life and prefer to lull themselves into a false sense of security by dreaming and imagining. They mistake the shadow for the substance. They fail to realize that life is uncertain, but that death is certain. One way of understanding life is to face and understand death, which is nothing more than a temporary end to a temporary existence. Many people do not even like to hear of the word death. They forget that death will come, whether they like it or not. Recollections on death with the right mental attitude can give a person courage and calmness as well as an insight into the nature of existence. Besides understanding death, we need a better understanding of our life. We are living a life that does not always proceed as smoothly as we would like it to. Very often, we face problems and difficulties. We should not be afraid of them because the penetration into the very nature of these problems and difficulties can provide us with a deeper insight into life. The worldly happiness provided by wealth, luxury, respectable positions in life which most people seek is an illusion because it is impermanent. The fact that the sale of sleeping pills and tranquilizers, admissions to mental hospitals and suicide rates have increased in proportion to modern material progress is enough testimony that we have to go beyond worldly material pleasure to seek for real happiness. This does not mean, of course, that Buddhism is a negative religion which condemns the acquisition of wealth. Far from it. The Buddha has expressly encouraged hard work to gain wealth because he said that wealth can give a person the opportunity to lead a decent life and to do meritorious action. What he discouraged was attachment to that wealth and the belief that wealth alone can bring ultimate happiness. The need for a religion. To understand the real purpose of life, it is advisable for a person to choose and follow an ethical moral system that discourages evil deeds, encourages good, and enables the purification of the mind. For simplicity, we shall call this system a religion. Religion is an expression of the striving of human beings, it is their greatest source of power, leading them onwards to self-realization. It has the power to transform a person with negative characteristics into someone with positive qualities. It makes the ignoble, noble, the selfish, unselfish, the proud, humble, the haughty, forbearing, the greedy, benevolent, the cruel, kind, the subjective, objective. Every religion represents, however imperfectly, a reaching upwards to a higher level of being. From the earliest times, religion has been the source of humanity's artistic and cultural inspiration. Although many forms of religion had come into being in the course of history, only to pass away and be forgotten, each one in its time had contributed something towards the sum total of human progress. Christianity helped to civilize the West, and the weakening of its influence has marked a downward trend of the Occidental spirit. Buddhism, which civilized the greater part of the East long before, is still a vital force, and in this age of scientific knowledge is likely to extend and to strengthen its influence. It does not, at any point, come into conflict with modern knowledge, but embraces and transcends all of it in a way that no other system of thought has ever done before or is ever likely to do. Westerners seek to conquer the universe for material ends. Buddhism and Eastern philosophy strive to attain harmony with nature and enhance spiritual satisfaction. Religion teaches a person how to calm down the senses and make the heart and mind peaceful. The secret of calming down the senses is to eliminate desire, which is the root of our disturbances. It is very important for us to have contentment. The more people crave for their property, the more they have to suffer. Property does not give happiness. A great many rich people in the world today are suffering from numerous physical and mental problems. With all the money they have, they cannot buy a solution to their problems. Yet, the poorest people who have learned to have contentment may enjoy their lives far more than the richest people do. As one rhyme goes, some have too much and yet do crave. I have little and seek no more. They are but poor though much more they have. And I am rich with little store. They poor, I rich, they beg, I give. They lack, I have, they pine, I live. Searching for a purpose in life. The aim in life varies among individuals. An artist may aim to paint masterpieces that will live long after he is gone. A scientist may want to discover a new phenomenon, formulate a new theory, or invent a new machine. A politician may wish to become a prime minister or a president. A young executive may aim to be a managing director of a multinational company. However, when you ask the artist, scientist, politician, and the young executive why they aim thus, they will reply that these achievements will give them a purpose in life and make them happy. But will these achievements bring lasting happiness? Everyone aims for happiness in life, yet they suffer more in the process. The value of life lies not in the length of the days, but in the use we make of them. People may live long without doing any service to anybody and thus, live very little. Realization. Once we realize the nature of life, characterized by unsatisfactoriness, change, and egolessness, as well as the nature of greed and the means of getting them satisfied, we can understand the reason why the happiness so desperately sought by many people is so elusive, like catching a moonbeam in their hands. They try to gain happiness through accumulation. When they are not successful in accumulating wealth, gaining position, power, and honor, and deriving pleasure from sense gratification, they pine and suffer, envying others who are successful in doing so. However, even if they are successful in getting these things, they suffer as well, because they then fear losing what they have gained, or their desires have now increased for more wealth, higher position, more power, and greater pleasure. Their desires can never seem to be completely satiated. This is why an understanding of life is important, so that we do not waste too much time doing the impossible. It is here that the adoption of a religion becomes important, since it encourages contentment and urges a person to look beyond the demands of his or her flesh and ego. In a religion like Buddhism, people are reminded that they are the heirs of their karma and the master of their destinies. In order to gain greater happiness, they must be prepared to forego short-term pleasures. If people do not believe in life after death, even then it is enough for them to lead a good, noble life on earth, enjoying a life of peace and happiness here and now, as well as performing actions which are for the benefit and happiness of others. Leading such a positive and wholesome life on earth and creating happiness for oneself and others is much better than a selfish life of trying to satisfy one's ego and greed. If we do not know how to live up to the expectations of others, how can we expect others to live according to our expectations? If, however, people believe in life after death, then according to the law of karma, rebirth will take place according to the quality of their deeds. People who have done many good deeds may be born in favorable conditions where they enjoy wealth and success, beauty and strength, good health, and meet good spiritual friends and teachers. Wholesome deeds can also lead to rebirth in the heavens and other sublime states, while unwholesome deeds lead to rebirth in suffering states. When people understand the law of karma, they will then make the effort to refrain from performing bad actions, and to try to cultivate the good. By so acting, they gain benefits not only in this life, but in many other lives to come. When they understand the nature of human life, then some important realizations arise. They realize that unlike a rock or stone, a human being possesses the innate potential to grow in wisdom, compassion, and awareness and be transformed by the self-development and growth. They also understand that it is not easy to be born as a human being, especially one who has the chance to listen to the Dharma. In addition, they are fully aware that life is impermanent, and they should, therefore, strive to practice the Dharma while they are still in a position to do so. They realize that the practice of Dharma is a lifelong educative process which enables them to release their true potentials trapped within their mind by ignorance and greed. To experience worldly pleasure there must be external objects or partners, but to gain mental happiness it is not necessary to have an external object. Based on these realizations and understanding, they will then try to be more aware of what and how they think, speak, and act. They will consider if their thoughts, speech, and actions are beneficial, done out of compassion, and have good effects for themselves as well as others. They will realize the true value of walking the road that leads to complete self-transformation, which is known to Buddhists as the Noble Eightfold Path. This path can help people to develop their moral strength, sila, through the restraint of negative actions and the cultivation of positive qualities conducive to personal, mental, and spiritual growth. In addition, it contains many techniques which they can apply to purify their thoughts, expand the possibilities of the mind, and bring about a complete change towards a wholesome personality. This practice of mental culture, bhavana, can widen and deepen the mind to gain a better understanding of the nature and characteristics of phenomena, life, and the universe. In short, this leads to the cultivation of wisdom, panna. As wisdom grows, so will love, compassion, kindness, and joy. They will have greater awareness of all forms of life and better understanding of their own thoughts, feelings, and motivations. In the process of self-transformation, people will no longer aspire for a divine birth as their ultimate goal in life. They will then set their goal much higher, and model themselves after the Buddha who has reached the summit of human perfection and attained the ineffable state we call enlightenment or nirvana. It is here that we develop a deep confidence in the Triple Gem and adopt the Buddha as our spiritual ideal. We will strive to eradicate greed, develop wisdom and compassion, and to be completely liberated from the bonds of samsara. Buddhism for human beings in society. This religion can be practiced either in society or in seclusion. There are some who believe that Buddhism is so lofty and sublime a system that it cannot be practiced by ordinary men and women in the workaday world. They think that one has to retire to a monastery or to some quiet place if one desires to be a true Buddhist. This is a sad misconception that comes from a lack of understanding of the Buddhist way of life. People jump to such conclusions after casually reading or hearing something about Buddhism. Some people form their impression of Buddhism after reading articles or books that give only a partial or lopsided view of Buddhism. The authors of such articles and books have only a limited understanding of the Buddha's teaching. His teaching is not meant only for monks in monasteries. The teaching is also for ordinary men and women living at home with their families. The Noble Eightfold Path is the Buddhist way of life that is intended for all people. This way of life is offered to all mankind without any distinction. When four aspects of life, i.e., family life, business life, social life, and spiritual life, are satisfactorily harmonized, lasting happiness is gained. The vast majority of people in the world cannot become monks or retire into caves or forests. However noble and pure Buddhism may be, it would be useless to the masses if they could not follow it in their daily life in the modern world. But if you understand the spirit of Buddhism correctly, you can surely follow and practice it while living the life of an ordinary person. There may be some who find it easier and more convenient to practice Buddhism by living in a remote place, in other words, by cutting themselves off from the society of others. Yet, other people may find that this kind of retirement dulls and depresses their whole being both physically and mentally, and that it may therefore not be conducive to the development of their spiritual and intellectual life. True renunciation does not mean running away physically from the world. Sariputta, the chief disciple of the Buddha, said that one man might live in a forest devoting himself to ascetic practices, but might be full of impure thoughts and defilements. Another might live in a village or a town, practicing no ascetic discipline, but his mind might be pure, and free from defilements. Of these two, said Sariputta, the one who lives a pure life in the village or town is definitely far superior to, and greater than, the one who lives in the forest. Majjhima Nikaya. The common belief that to follow the Buddha's teaching one has to retire from a normal family life is a misconception. It is really an unconscious defense against practicing it. There are numerous references in Buddhist literature to men and women living ordinary, normal family lives who successfully practiced what the Buddha taught and realized nirvana. Vakagata the Wanderer once asked the Buddha directly whether there were laymen and women leading the family life who followed his teaching successfully and attained the high spiritual states. The Buddha categorically stated that there were many laymen and women leading the family life who had followed his teaching successfully and attained the high spiritual states. It may be agreeable for certain people to live a retired life in a quiet place away from noise and disturbances. But it is certainly more praiseworthy and courageous to practice Buddhism living among fellow beings, helping them and offering service to them. It may perhaps be useful in some cases for a person to live in retirement for a time in order to improve the mind and character, as a preliminary to moral, spiritual, and intellectual training, to be strong enough to come out later and help others. But if a person lives all his or her life in solitude, thinking only of personal happiness and salvation, without caring for his or her fellow men, this surely is not completely in keeping with the Buddha's teaching, which is based on love, compassion, and service to others. One might now ask, if a person can follow Buddhism while living the life of an ordinary person, why was the Sangha, the order of monks, established by the Buddha? The order provides an opportunity for those who are willing to devote their lives not only to their own spiritual and intellectual development, but also to the service of others. An ordinary layperson with a family cannot be expected to devote a life to the service of others, whereas a monk or nun, who has no family responsibilities or any other worldly ties, is in a position to devote his or her life for the good of the many. Dr. Walpolarehula. And what is this good that many can benefit from? Monks and nuns cannot give material comfort to a layperson, but they can provide spiritual guidance to those who are troubled by worldly, family, emotional problems and so on. Monks and nuns devote their lives to the pursuit of knowledge of the Dharma as taught by the Buddha. They explain the teaching in simplified form to the untutored layperson. And if the layperson is well educated, they are there to discuss the deeper aspects of the teaching so that both parties can gain intellectually from the discussion. In Buddhist countries, the Sangha are largely responsible for the education of the young. As a result of their contribution, Buddhist countries have populations which are literate and well versed in spiritual values. The Sangha also comfort those who are bereaved and emotionally upset by explaining how all humanity is subject to similar disturbances. In turn, the layperson is expected to look after the material well-being of the Sangha who do not earn income to provide themselves with food, shelter, medicine, and clothing. In common Buddhist practice, it is considered meritorious for lay people to contribute to the well-being of the Sangha because by so doing they make it possible for the Sangha to continue to minister to the spiritual needs of the people and to develop their own mental purity. The Buddhist way of life for householders. The Buddha considered economic welfare as a requisite for human comfort, but moral and spiritual development for a happy, peaceful, and contented life. A mon named Dinghajanu once visited the Buddha and said, "Venerable Sir, we are ordinary laymen, leading a family life with wife and children. Would the Blessed One teach us some doctrines which will be conducive to our happiness in this world and hereafter?" The Buddha told him that there are four things which are conducive to a human's happiness in this world. 1. He should be skilled, efficient, earnest, and energetic in whatever profession he is engaged, and he should know it well. Uthanasampada. 2. He should protect his income, which he has thus earned righteously, with the sweat of his brow. Arakhasampada. 3. He should have good friends, Kalyanamitta, who are faithful, learned, virtuous, liberal and intelligent, who will help him along the right path away from evil. 4. He should spend reasonably, in proportion to his income, neither too much nor too little, i.e., he should not hoard wealth avariciously nor should he be extravagant. In other words, he should live within his means. Samajivakata. Then the Buddha expounds the four virtues conducive to a layman's happiness hereafter. 1. Sada. He should have faith and confidence in moral, spiritual, and intellectual values. 2. Sila. He should abstain from destroying and harming life, from stealing and cheating, from adultery, from falsehood, and from intoxicating drinks. 3. Kaga. He should practice charity, generosity, without attachment and craving for his wealth. 4. Panna. He should develop wisdom which leads to the complete destruction of suffering, to the realization of nirvana. Sometimes the Buddha even went into details about saving money and spending it, as, for instance, when he told the young man Sagala that he should spend 1/4 of his income on his daily expenses, invest half in his business and other activities and put aside 1/4 for any emergency. Once the Buddha told Anathapindika, the great banker, one of his most devoted lay disciples who founded for him the celebrated Jetavana monastery at Savatthi, that a layman who leads an ordinary family life has four kinds of happiness. The first happiness is to enjoy economic security or sufficient wealth acquired by just and righteous means, athasukha. The second is spending that wealth liberally on himself, his family, his friends and relatives, and on meritorious deeds, bhagasukha. The third to be free from debts, ananasukha. The fourth happiness is to live a faultless, and a pure life without committing evil in thought, word, or deed, anavahyajaka. It must be noted here that first three are economic and material happiness, which is not as noble as the spiritual happiness arising out of a faultless and good life. From the few examples given above, one can see that the Buddha considered economic welfare as a requisite for human happiness, but that he did not recognize progress as real and true if it was only material, devoid of a spiritual and moral foundation. While encouraging material progress, Buddhism always lays great stress on the development of moral and spiritual character for a happy, peaceful, and contented society. Many people think that to be a good Buddhist one must have absolutely nothing to do with the materialistic life. This is not correct. What the Buddha teaches is that while we can enjoy material comforts without going to extremes, we must also conscientiously develop the spiritual aspects of our lives. While we can enjoy sensual pleasures as lay people, we should never be unduly attached to them to the extent that they hinder our spiritual progress. Buddhism emphasizes the need for a person to follow the middle path. The Buddha's teaching is not based on the obliteration of the world but on the obliteration of ignorance and selfish craving.